an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Rule of Wolves, chapters 12, 13, and 14. Nina, Zoya, and Nikolai. In these chapters, there is so much going on. Oh my god, I don't even know where to start. Like, Nina is about to get a lot closer to these letters than I thought she would this quickly. Nikolai is trying to figure out how to get these women to, work with him and doesn't know if that's going to happen. And then the Darkling is pulling some shit by the end of Zoya's chapter. And I had to stop reading, and that just felt really mean-spirited. So, I'm mad about it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. Except Joanna, how dare you make me stop reading there? If Joanna was here, she'd probably be like, you could have kept reading. I really wouldn't have stopped you. But I have to stop. There has to be a place where I draw the line because I can get out of hand. And I know that it's really my own fault. Okay, so we're going to start off with Nikolai's POV. And he wakes up and Zoya has already taken off to do her meeting between Alina and the Darkling, and she has not said goodbye. And I really like the way that that it's described as it stung and he was glad. You know, he doesn't want to have to say goodbye, but also the fact that he doesn't get to. That is just such a thing. Man, I mean, this is even a thing in a relationship that you, can have, where you can be open about how you feel about a person. Sometimes not getting to say goodbye can feel a little bit like, all right, I would have liked it, but it might be better, because drawing it out makes it worse. And it says, why do I feel like I've had my guts gently gnawed on by a Volcra? So, yeah, he is kind of just openly admitting to himself that he's in love with her at this point. It's not even a question. And he knows, I'm pretty certain, that she is in love with him as well. But she's in a lot more, I won't even say quite denial, because that implies that she won't admit it to herself. And she will, but she also admits that she can't. She isn't really in denial. It's just self-denial, if that makes sense. And he seems like he is more willing to indulge himself mentally than she is, which does make sense. I mean, she's just so much more rigid in a lot of ways in how she decides to handle her responsibilities. And that is not to say that Nikolai doesn't take his responsibility seriously, because he definitely does, but he acknowledges all the points as he deals with his responsibility. And I feel like Zoya is just, what's the point of acknowledging them? It does not help, and you are already aware that those points are ultimately irrelevant, so why even mention them? To which I say, I really do get it, and I kind of wish at times I could be more like that. But in dealing with things like this, I definitely feel a lot more like Nikolai. So he is going to meet the princess, and they're talking about the miracle of the fact that she is even still alive. And, obviously the miracle is actually that we have Grisha working for us. The fire had scorched the hair from her head, which was wrapped in soft white linen. She had no eyebrows or lashes. Genya had explained that it would take several days to bring Aries' flesh and hair back to full health, but they had reversed the worst of the damage. It was a miracle she had survived, a miracle wrought by Grisha healers who had restored her body and kept her pain in check as they did it. So this is kind of remarkable to me. I am aware that the Grisha have a lot of ability, But it's different to like know that they can do a lot than it is to find out that they can almost completely undo the effects of a pretty severe burn. I don't know why. I think it's because in a lot of like magical systems, fire winds up sort of trumping everything in terms of its like effectiveness, where it's just the thing that sort of puts things to rest and is the final word. That I kind of expected that the Grisha wouldn't be able to do all that much for burns. And that's just never actually been a thing that has been mentioned in this magical system. And I'm so glad, honestly, because there has always been a feeling for me, and I do understand that having a built-in limit on abilities is kind of a good thing story-wise, but I've always sort of felt like if fire can undo so much and render so much sort of impotent, then fire is a little bit OP. And I still do feel that way with certain properties that shall remain nameless. So he comes in and she tells him, I would prefer it if you left. And he's just like, yeah, she said that every time I come in. Every time I come in. And she's also dealing, obviously, here with the grief of realizing that what happened to her wasn't an accident. And she's still, at the start of the scene, not really quite willing to go there. It's really tough. I hate this so much. So they talk a little bit before, like, he's sort of warming her up, and eventually why would the Tavgorod do such a thing? The Shenya guarded my cradle while I slept as an infant. Tying taught, I don't know why I can't read today. God. Tying taught me to climb trees. I don't understand it. What happened before we arrived that afternoon? Nothing. Your guards brought me a letter from my sister, a reply to the wedding invitation you insisted on sending. She asked that I inform the Tavgorod of the wedding, and I brought it to them. They told me the message was a code, that it was time to escape. But there was another command in her letter. I read it myself. There was no such thing. And this whole bit here, it's sort of... So, okay, here's the thing. She isn't willing to admit what is going on here. And what we're supposed to think is that her sister being queen is obviously like a step down because she's so cruel. And obviously she is, because we know about the way that she, like, reinstated the fucking experimentation on innocent people and whatnot. However, I have to say, the way the area is handling all of this intrigue, I guess is the way to put it, does give me pause in terms of having her become a queen. I can't see her being an effective leader when she is this unwilling to face the facts that are right in front of her. It's hard, like, I completely understand the feeling of utter betrayal. I completely understand not wanting to believe. But you are on a sick bed, finally recovering from burns that were clearly inflicted on purpose, and everybody that you were with is dead. And it just feels like continuing to dig your heels in and pretend like this isn't happening. That's not a good leader. That's not somebody who has the kind of cunning that you need. You don't need to be like a straight up manipulator to, well, I don't know. Maybe you do. I'm just saying that she was meant to be queen because she can be kind and compassionate, and that's all well and good. But when you are those things, that also can set you up to be manipulated by other people who see that as a weakness. And it can be used as a weakness. They are not inherently weaknesses, but they can be exploited. And it just seems like if she were to become queen, she would need to do a lot of growing from this point to really have any real competence, in my opinion. So he brings in Mayu, and Mayu has been, kept separate from her. They haven't reinstated all of her strength yet because she is a badass. And he has like her talk with Ari about what the letter said. This is a really difficult moment too, that I really appreciate these little touches, because Bardugo is so conscious of the fact that Mayu has just gone through this like awful loss, and it's self-inflicted, of course, but she also was in a position where she didn't have a lot of choice. But she asks the princess, "Are you aware of this poem that your sister included in the letter?" And the princess says, I'm not sure about it, no. And it says, "A sad smile touched Mayu's lips, and Nikolai wondered if she was thinking of Isaac, who had consumed poetry the way other men drank wine." And if that isn't one of those real fucking moments where you're in the midst of something else, it isn't the time for you to acknowledge this feeling, but somebody says something that gives you a twinge because it reminds you of something else, and that kind of, those are the sort of like pitfalls of grief that people don't really talk about. There's a lot of moments when you're grieving that you sort of are mentally prepared for, because you're going into the room they used to live in, or you're going into a restaurant that the two of you frequented together. Things like that, where you are fully aware of the emotional landmines and you have, in a way, prepared yourself. And then there's things like this, where it's not the kind of thing that you can possibly prepare for. And therefore, when those landmines detonate, your guard is so down that sometimes they can hit in a way that just wrecks you for several minutes, if not more. And anybody who has had a loss, I think, probably can recall moments where they were just going about their day and a song came on, or somebody said some certain thing, like with an inflection or turn of phrase that reminds you of that person, and you just dissolve crying. And it's like, wait, why is this what did it? Who knows? Because life sucks and is mean, and we have love, and love is just very expensive. Love just costs a great deal. So, it tells the story of a royal hunt. A herd of deer are pursued through the woods and countryside by a relentless pack of hounds. Rather than let themselves be slaughtered by the pack, the deer hurl themselves off a cliffside. Ares says, wait, they killed themselves because of a poem? And finally, Ares is like really fucking getting it. Nikolai sighed. He could say that Queen Maki was ruthless, but she wasn't any more ruthless than she'd had to be. And he admits, when I sent the invitation, I forced her hand. She doesn't want us to marry. She doesn't want a Ravkin-Shu alliance. And you really should ask yourself the question, if this were set up to go the way you keep saying it was, why wouldn't they just keep you safe at home and send Mayu on this job without you? And she is trying to say, I was here to help coach her and give her advice. If there were parts of the conversation that she ran into that she didn't really know how to answer, she could just kind of put him off until the next conversation and then ask me. I guess that sounds like it would convince somebody who isn't very suspicious, but there are other people who could have done that job. Yeah. When he asks, did your sister's ministers know about this plot? She says, I assume they did. My sister told me to keep silent. She said the people would not approve. Nikolai had to respect, and she says would not approve of our plot. Nikolai had to respect that she didn't try to lay full blame for the assassination attempt at her sister's door. And that's true. It wasn't something that really occurred to me. Even though she wound up becoming a victim, that doesn't mean that she wasn't part of the initial plan. Like, she fully knew what it was that they were setting in to do, at least when it came to killing him. So the idea that she's a victim, for me, can overshadow the fact that she was initially involved in a different plan that was still intended to kill someone, and multiple someones, actually, because Mayu was going to kill herself after killing him. So that shit was gonna be on her shoulders, and she knew it, and she was still willingly participating in it while thinking that she was just gonna get to just fucking ride off into the sunset and go live a lovely, quiet life. And this is when Mayu realizes that the queen doesn't know that she is alive, and I don't believe he's told the queen about her sister being alive either. So at this point, he takes Mayu, because she's in like a wheelchair, and he's rolling her out and back to her own room. And as they're leaving, Eri stops her and says, I am sorry for what my sister asked of you and for what I asked of you. And honestly, I really did appreciate that. It's not like, just saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but so many rulers would never even acknowledge or feel any real compunction about asking a soldier to sacrifice themselves. And to a point, I can understand why, because they can't let themselves feel that way all the time, or they would never get anything done. But at this point, the position that Eri is in means that she has the luxury of really like thinking about the consequences of things. And I appreciate her just acknowledging, we were going to have you commit murder and kill yourself. You have committed murder. And I don't know if Eri is aware of the fact that Mayu was like in love with the guy that she killed in the end. I don't think that she even knows about that part, but I'm sure without that, it's still just horrific. So I can only imagine how much worse it would be for her if she did know. So this is when he talks to Mayu separately. And she says, if Queen Maki wants a war, then that is what the Tavgarad want. And he says, are you sure that you're still Tavgarad? And she, at this point, kind of throws it in his face that he is nothing like Isaac, that Isaac was a better man than him, that he was like more gentle, and that if she had ever met Nikolai for like a moment before, there was no way that she would have been fooled by Isaac upon meeting him, because their whole vibe is just completely different. And he says in his turn, yeah, well, you wouldn't have been fooled. I would not have been fooled by a fucking guard in fancy gowns. Like, of course I would have been able to tell the difference. So, yeah. And he says, Isaac was trained to be a soldier, not a king. And she says, you are a glib, vain fool. You are everything Isaac was not. I would argue we were both fools. He was a better man than you'll ever be. On that, we can agree. So clearly, she just really resents the fact that she killed what she thinks is the worst person. Or the better person, my bad. And that the person who is still alive is not only the one that she was supposed to have killed, but he is just not as worthy, in her opinion. And that does suck. Not gonna lie, girl, that's heavy. And he tells her finally about her brother being put into the program, the Kergud program. And she at first starts to be like, she swore she would free him. And then she's like, oh, God, of course. First of all, I don't know why I thought she'd keep her word. And secondly, I failed. So there's no reason for her to keep her word. And he is watching her and is like, I know you're thinking about taking your own life. And she's like, you're goddamn right. And he says, finally, I think that maybe all isn't lost, that there is something that we can do. I don't plan to force the princess to wed me, but I don't think I'm going to have to force her. To which she's like, you really think you're that charming? And he's like, maybe. And before I put anyone to death and we all go merrily to the next world, I'd ask you to stay alive and try to entertain a bit of hope that there is never only one answer to a question. You're alive today, and I prefer you kept it that way. And Isaac would want the same. Though I put a knife in his heart? I think so. Love is not known for making men reasonable, which is a very good line. I will tell my healers to restore your strength. Friend or foe, Ravka will have you at your best. I've never been one to shy away from a challenge. So then we have Nikolai, who is, he is flying to that weird marsh where, the dude who I keep thinking of as like a steampunk Tony Stark has his whole, little secret empire, the Gilded Bog. That's what it's called. And he is riding in this like little baby plane, and they are weapons testing and accidentally hit him. And he gets saved by a Grisha who manages to lift the plane before it just free falls to the ground. But in the midst of that, his demon is like coming to the fore. And there's a real moment of him considering letting the demon loose because maybe it can save his life. But he isn't convinced that it would. He isn't convinced that he could control it. And he isn't convinced that it would not hurt other people if he kind of like let it loose. So even in the midst of threat to his life, he is still willing to die holding it back. And it's just like, if I die, you die with me. And that's that. Which honestly, I really respect. It's the sort of thing that like, I feel like a lot of writers would have it be, he's going to be pressed and put in a position where he has to rely on the demon, and it will turn out to be some sort of like weird ally. And then he will decide that maybe I can work with this thing. And there's nothing wrong with that kind of story, but it is a little bit predictable. And it does feel also a little bit easy. Once you have something inside you that like can be a force for good or ill, and you learn how to turn it towards your advantage, it's like slightly less interesting in some ways than just having something that you constantly have to fight. Like, I know that some might say the opposite, where if you can turn it towards your advantage, that's a trickier line to walk. That's more like of a gray area versus the black and white of something being actually just straight up evil. But I think that those sorts of stories can be used as a sort of get out of jail free card a little bit, where the person who is being sort of infiltrated, so to speak, winds up having accidental access to like a low-key superpower that they wouldn't otherwise have. And so all of a sudden, this is no longer a bad thing at all in a lot of ways. It's actually just seems like a straight up advantage. And again, that has its place. And even if that does wind up being what happens here, I'm not going to be mad about it. But at least in this moment, I really respected the fact that it was all about, I'm going to lock this bitch down and take it with me because I don't know what it would do. And I'm not taking that kind of risk. I really admire that. That's the kind of like fucking stubbornness that I can get behind. And they are talking about the fact that when they save him and he gets out, Genya realizes that he wasn't wearing a parachute. And all of them are just like, you need to wear that shit all the time. You can't just be acting like, well, this isn't a battle. I didn't think I would need one. That's not the way. You've got to operate like you're going to be attacked all the time. And there's a wonderful moment where Genya says, because Nikolai is immediately wanting to get back to work, despite the fact that he may have a concussion. And Genya says, you will sit yourself down and let me make sure you don't have a concussion. Then you will have a cup of tea. And then, if I'm feeling generous, you can talk to David about things that explode. You do realize I'm the king. Do you? I love that reply. That is exactly the energy. And then he looks at David, and David just says, I don't argue with my wife when she's right. If only every man had that kind of like foresight. They just don't want to admit when we're right. That's like the main thing. If they could do that, they would be ahead of the game. But, you know. So they go downstairs and have some tea, and they settle in talking about the rockets. And what this comes down to, essentially, is that there is the possibility that they could build something that could make a massive amount of damage. But David is just basically like, I'm not going to do this. Look, when I worked with the Darkling, I did a lot of things just out of the pure curiosity of how to do them, without thinking about the consequences of any of it. I was just curious. I was just trying things out and experimenting. And in doing that, I granted him so many little powers that got him into places he otherwise would have been stymied, and it made everything so much worse. I love the way he talks about this. I helped put the collar around Alina's neck. I created the Lumia that allowed him to enter the fold without her power. Without my help, he never could have. I won't be responsible for this too. And there's a kind of like, as much as it's very clear that Nikolai understands where David is coming from, he doesn't really come down on, he doesn't so much say whether he agrees or disagrees, as asks everyone what they think and lets them sort of carry on the conversation. And there's a real sense of him trying to decide how he feels about it by listening to all parties involved that I, again, really admire. So many people think that they have all the answers, or that their perspective is either the only one that matters, or they really do think that they have considered all other perspectives. And what's sort of funny about that is, like, inherently, because of the fact that they are other perspectives, the likelihood that you have thought of them is kind of low unless you have really talked to a lot of people throughout your life and sort of trained yourself to remember those people and their circumstances and consider those automatically. A lot of folks just don't really understand the power of a different point of view. So I just like the fact that Nikolai here has decided that he's going to sit back and allow a discussion to take place and sort of absorb it. Because it's like, not to make a weird comparison, but I'm going to make a weird comparison. I have followed a lot of pages on Facebook that are like aimed at marginalized groups, people who are neurodivergent, people who are queer or black and, you know, disabled. There is a lot of value in being in those spaces, reading the posts, reading the comments, and not talking. Because I, frankly, don't have anything to bring to the conversation. It comes down to that. I know how I feel about a thing, and if I'm actually interested in listening and learning, I don't need to tell anybody how I feel about it because I'm certain, as an advantaged, privileged person, they have heard that shit. I'm not going to be saying anything new. So I just read and learn. And I honestly believe that it has helped so much with my understanding of certain issues to just see discussions taking place. And that's not to say that like any of these pages that the community it's aimed at is a monolith, because there are plenty of disagreements within these communities. But even the disagreements can be really enlightening, where you're like, oh, I never thought about like people disagreeing about this aspect of it, kind of thing. So there's a sort of vibe for me like that Nikolai is doing that here. And I think that that is a really good tactic. So this is when Nikolai talks about the Fjerdan prince and the fact that he's more ill than any of them have really thought, because it's probably been kept secret how poorly he's doing. And it's an interesting thing. So Leone says, because they're talking about what's going on with the alliance between the Fjerdans and the Shu. Let's see. It's possible that our alliance with the Shu will give them pause, assuming we're successful in forging it. But we need to accept that the prince may die, and the Grimjars may have no choice but to wage war. I don't understand. If Rasmus dies, his father will still rule. His younger brother will become heir. Heir to nothing, said Adric. Fjerdans don't think of the royal family the way that the Shu do, or even the way Ravkins do. They follow the will of Jel, and the strength of Jel is the way that he shows favor. Fjerdan dynasties that have reigned have always taken their place by force. The Grimjars will need to prove they still deserve the throne. That's really interesting. I wasn't aware that's how it worked. And that really does throw things into a kind of relief in terms of the anxiety that the queen has about her son's health, and knowing that, you know, like his being ill all the time is partially causing everybody to think maybe they don't deserve it already. And then if he were to die, they have to prove themselves again, and what a like situation that would be. If they opt for peace, they risk looking weak. If they opt for war, they will be determined to win at any cost, and Jarl Broom will be there to goad them on. And they have the advantage if they march, and it will mean an end to a free Ravka. My desire to be beloved conflicts mightily with our need to win this war. I've become an accountant, tallying lives to be taken, lives to be spared. But we must make these decisions just the same. I hope diplomacy may still win. I hope we can offer Fjerda a peace that they will take. I hope we'll never need to unleash the terrors we seek to build. And what happens when we're out of hope? Asked David. We end where we always end, said Nikolai, with war. So then we go to Nina. And Nina is basically, there's a conversation, and I spent 35 minutes talking about one chapter out of these three, so I am going to have to pick up the pace here. But Nina is with the Brooms, and they are talking about what it was like for her to visit the Queen and what she said. And she's very honest about the Queen, like, potentially thinking that she might be a spy. Jarl Broom, of course, is like, well, are you? And she just tells him they will find nothing to call into question who I am when they search for it, which is just a very, like, not that Nina has any problem with lying, but it is funny how she can, like, be telling the truth and also not. And there's also the fact that, like, clearly throughout all of this, Broom is still so contemptuous of this prince for being sick. And Hanne really is having a hard time sort of keeping her mind to herself about this, because she's just frustrated with the fact that he is so impatient with this kid. And let's see. 2 days later, Hanne put on one of her new gowns of seafoam silk, and Nina dressed in more modest rose wool. So they're getting ready for this party, and they're talking about the way that they are going to handle the prince. And Hanne doesn't want to hear that she shouldn't continue to try and heal him. What if we could help him heal and become a better prince and someday a better king? And that is kind of what has been on my mind as well. That it's sort of interesting that it hadn't seemed to like occur to Nina, but if you get somebody like the prince in your hand and are able to, by degrees, open their mind a little bit, get them to see some things in a different way, you can influence them quite a bit to changing the entire way they handle making certain decisions. And yeah, I'm very into this concept, and I really wonder if affecting his health is something that would help. And Nina is realizing as she looks at Hanne how Hanne is straight up glowing because she's helping someone. And it's just, it's beyond like helping in terms of using her power. This is obviously what she's like kind of born to do. It's what feeds her soul. And Nina is just like, God, I really can't be mad at her for wanting to keep doing this, but it's just so dangerous. She's really worried, obviously. So they go to this party and they go to the prince, who is in a much worse mood than the other day. And I will say I've been listening to the audiobook for this, and the narrator isn't getting on my nerves quite as bad as she did with the original trilogy, because I felt like she was so obnoxious in that. And I feel like she's toned it down some. And this exchange especially, I feel like she does the sort of like crankiness of the prince really well. You could deliver his lines in a way that seems almost angry, but it's much more that he is being curt and to the point because he doesn't have the energy to like be diplomatic about anything, which honestly fucking relate. Same. And so, yeah, he says something about like their curtsies need work. He says something about how Hanne's maid is wearing a much like worse type of fabric that speaks of a petty and jealous disposition. Wool suits me very well, said Nina. I wouldn't know what to do in silks or satin. A profound lie. She could think of nothing better than sliding about naked on satin sheets. Matthias would have been scandalized. And what would Hanne think? The thought popped into her head unbidden, followed by a wave of guilt. I was very interested in the wave of guilt, because I don't feel that the wave of guilt has anything to do with, like, homophobia. I believe that that wave of guilt is much more about, I am already thinking about somebody else, and I just lost Matthias, and I shouldn't be feeling this way about anyone right now. And that is the kind of thing that I have never had to experience. I've never, like, lost a partner in that sort of way. And I can only imagine how much that would weigh on you, feeling like you might be being disrespectful to their memory somehow by moving on, you know? Yeah, I could definitely see that. So at this point, they finally begin to sort of break through his attitude. And this kid, he's like, he does appreciate Hanne's directness, you know. Here and there, she makes a little bit of a comment, and he's like, all right, yeah, I see you. And he has food brought to them. Today, I actually have some appetite. So this is when Nina says, we saw that Vadik Demidov is here. Oh, yes. The little Lantsov never misses a party. And is he really of royal blood? That's the topic of conversation at every dinner party. Why are you so interested? Hanne laughed. Mila is obsessed with Vadik Demidov. Sweet Jell, why? He's a boring lump of country bumpkin. But it's such a marvelous story, said Nina. A boy of royal blood plucked from obscurity? I suppose, you know, this, so eventually I don't know where he was found. You aren't curious? Why should I be? He will be a king, will he not? So will I, assuming I live. An awkward silence fell. I'm in a mood today. My parents felt it was essential I appear in public quickly after what happened at the start of Heartwood. I was feeling quite well after that, but events like these, it's hard for me to be in a room full of people I know wish me dead. And they try and say I know that's not true. And he's like, yeah, no, it absolutely is. I'm not a fool. I know what this is like. I know they wish I hadn't been born at all, and that my little brother could be the one to inherit. And Hannah says you must stay alive to spite them, which honestly is a bit of a mood. I don't know if y'all have ever watched the Secret Garden film that had Maggie Smith in it. It's so good. But there's a moment where she meets her cousin Colin, and he's talking about, oh, of course I'm going to die. Everyone says I'll die. If everyone said that about me, I wouldn't do it. Which, honestly, that is so my whole energy. People keep telling me I'm going to die, then I'm just going to extra live. Like, fuck you. I wish that could be a thing. So, he says that he'll introduce her to Demidov, and it's really clear that he does not think much of the fact that Nina is really excited at the prospect of this. She's pretending to basically be a fangirl, and it's clearly working. I really enjoy the line where she thinks no one takes care to guard against a dull blade. If he thinks she's a besotted fool, then so much the better for her. And so they meet him. And Demidov, first of all, does not bow to the prince and has to be told to, which it's a really interesting sort of moment that to me speaks of the fact that either he is definitely from the country as he has been claiming because he doesn't know how to behave at court, or he just doesn't respect the prince at all. And I can't decide. I think it's just the first one. But yeah. May I introduce you to Hanne Broom? And he gets introduced to her, is very, cordial. But then when he gets introduced to Nina, he basically, ignores her. And it's very clear he thinks it's beneath him to have a conversation with her at all. And she decides that she's going to go for it anyway and says, she calls him Your Majesty, first of all, which is kind of more flattery than truth, obviously. Prince Rasmus told us how you grew up in the country, how lovely that must have been. I've always preferred the country to the city, Demidov said unconvincingly. And they talk about the house, and Nina is pressing about just overall the look of wherever he came from. It had a rustic elegance one cannot find in the halls of grand palaces. Demidov's eyes darted left and then right. He licked his lips. He was lying, but not about growing up in a dacha. He had that very particular embarrassment of genteel poverty, exactly as a poor Lantsov relation might. Nina's heart sank. Yeah, I am super curious about what exactly it is that he's lying about then. I'm just, I really would like to know. And at one point, the apparat, who is here, by the way, and I recalled when we got to this part of what I didn't like about the narrator for the original series was how, I think it wasn't even her fault so much, but the apparat is such a bigger thing in the original trilogy, and she voiced him as this with this really creaky, oily voice that speaks extremely slowly, so that I would, if I knew that I was going to be in a section where the apparat was going to have a lot of screen time, so to speak, I would turn the speed up on the audiobook because I couldn't take how long it took for her to get a sentence out. So actually, I guess that is her fault because it's not like the fucking author told her to do that. But let's see. Oh, Cheryl's in the chat says, traditionally, I don't think monarchs are expected to kneel to other monarchs, so it might be arrogance on Demidov's part pretending that he's a king already. I mean, he wasn't asked to kneel, just to bow. But I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what it is. It's just like the prince saying you're not a king yet is sort of like actually, because I thought it was the king sort of trying to imply he's getting above himself, and that wasn't actually what was going on, because the king just doesn't like him, and so, or the prince just doesn't like him and was just trying to sort of like shame him. But maybe it is as simple as that. Maybe it's exactly what it looks like, and he does sort of see himself as a king already. So yeah, this is a point when the apparat is like, you'll grow to be a fair and pious king, and the prince says, and a biddable one. And Nina notices this guy twitch a little bit, and obviously this man is not liking the idea of basically becoming like a Fjerdan puppet and mouthpiece, because he has like really good Ravkan. She notices that he speaks with no real accent that she can detect. He does seem like he is from Ravka. I am so curious about this guy. I really can't think, like, I feel like he's going to wind up being somebody tailored. You know, somebody that we will actually find out that we know. But I can't imagine who. And I might be completely off base here. I don't know. So let's see. They leave finally, and Hanne says, I don't think they like you. Should I be worried? Prince Rasmus asked cheerily. Nina thought so. Demidov had none of Nikolai's charm, but he'd been both pleasant and diplomatic, and unless he was an extraordinary actor, she didn't think he was lying about his Lantsov blood. He was certainly Ravkan. She'd seen his reaction when Rasmus had suggested Demidov would rule as a Fjerdan puppet. He had a nobleman's pride, but was it Lantsov pride? And this is when she asked the king, like, do you think that the Ravkan king is really a bastard? I've heard people really like Nikolai, even though, like, allegedly he is a bastard. He is sort of beloved. And he says something about how, oh, no, he's definitely a bastard. We have his mother's letters to prove it. And he says that he has seen them. He hasn't seen them. He has just heard that they're very racy. And he says that they are actually in Jarl Broom's custody, which makes total sense, and I don't know why I didn't, like, expect that. And that's not to say that he just has them in his house, because obviously it's under much better security than that. They are in the Druskel sector, the most secure, unbreachable part of the ice court, crowded with witch hunters and wolves trained to hunt Grisha. So they go back to the room, and her and Hanne talk about what's going on here. And Hanne is being a little bit incautious, and I'm starting to get a bit nervous about how freely she is, like, kind of talking openly. She needs to get a hold of herself. But let's see. I'm trying to find the spot where they kind of, even if I drew you a plan of the Druskel sector, how would you get inside? The only entrance is through the gate in the ring wall, and they added additional security after the prison break 2 years ago. You're telling me your father leaves the ice court every time he needs to see his troops? That doesn't make any sense. There's another way, but it means crossing the moat. It's only ever used at Hringala initiation and during emergencies. Someone on the inside would have to let you in. Not even I know how it's done. And Nina knows this path because Matthias and Kaz used it during their little heist. I don't remember this super well, but I do remember them being separated from everybody. And she says, then I'll have to go out before I can get back in on the day of the royal hunt. I was hoping we could make an excuse to get out of that. I thought you'd leap at the chance to ride again. Side saddle? In pursuit of some poor stag no one intends to eat so some podge can put his antlers on a wall? We can talk the prince into giving the meat to the poor. And think of side saddle as a challenge? Hanne cut her a withering glance. The parties and balls and constant social interaction of Heartwood had exhausted her, but they just made Nina feel more alive. She liked dressing up with Hanne. She liked the whirl of people, and she finally felt like she was positioned to garner the intelligence she needed. This is so interesting to me because I keep thinking about the obvious attraction that she has to Hanne, and there's my instinctual, well, you guys don't like any of the same things, so what is it that draws you in? And then I think about Nina and Matthias, and like they didn't really see eye to eye on most things either. And she was still wildly in love with him. So, you know, I guess it just doesn't matter. And it's not like Nina doesn't live the kind of life where the fact that they don't like the same hobbies is going to like really throw a wrench in their relationship, because they don't have the leisure time for that. They are on missions and they do what they need to do. So I guess, you know, you gotta do. So let's see. We don't have to go on the hunt, said Nina. We just need to get outside and then talk to your father and get him to take us in. He won't do it. Women aren't permitted there. Not even to see the kennels? Hanne hesitated. I know he's brought my mother to see the wolves. And you've been inside. I told you it was years ago. You liked going with him, didn't you? I liked any chance to be with him. He was fun. And then she describes the way that he has basically become petrified like a forest. And it's interesting, like this just, I can relate to this a lot because my father was away when I was younger and he just grew so much more rigid as he got older. And like in the years right before he passed away, he had started to loosen up again. But it really felt like he was loosening up because he didn't plan to be around that much longer. There was a part of me that sensed what was happening there. And, you know, his death, he could have prevented by taking his medication the way he was supposed to, which he did not. So, yeah, he was just sort of like, in a way, I think, giving up. And I'm still mad at him about it. So, we go on to Zoya. And she is riding in an airship with the Darkling, and he is just as irritating as I remember. His hands and feet are shackled. Eventually, when they reach Alina, she pulls a blindfold over his face, and he says something about how, like, do you think this is really necessary? And she's like, probably not, but she just likes doing it because fuck this guy. And honestly, yeah, good call. And he asks, where is she? And Zoya's like, I thought Sancta Elisaveta knew everything. She was like omniscient. And he says, she wouldn't tell me. Zoya didn't bother to stifle her pleasure. A jealous saint, who knew? I'll tell you about the meeting after you tell me about the Thornwood. And I really like that idea of her just being like, no, you don't need Alina. She's not even a saint anymore. She doesn't even have her power. I'm not telling you anything about her. The fact that he even asked, like, interesting. So they have a bit of a talk about the Thornwood, but it becomes very clear that he has a lot of iffy information that is potentially outdated. It's just all like, they're making a deal with him based on what feels very much like hearsay is all that he's got to go on, you know? I don't know. We'll see, but I don't have a lot of faith in this guy for very valid reasons. And he says that, oh no, that's right. She is like getting so frustrated with him, and he's like, are you thinking about killing me? And she's like, yeah. Your king wouldn't be pleased. I'm not going to do it, she lied. I just enjoy thinking about it. It's soothing, like humming myself a little melody. Besides, death is too good for you. Is it? He sounded almost curious. What would make my atonement complete? An eternity of torture? It would be a start, though letting you live a long life without your power isn't a bad beginning either. Now his face went cold. Make no mistake, Zoya Nazyalensky. I did not live 100 lives, die, and return to this earth to live as an ordinary man. I will find a path back to my power. One way or another, I'll cast out the remainders of Yuri's soul. But the Obispaya is your king's only chance to be free of his demon and for the world to be free of the fold. And I really like the fact that her saying living as an ordinary man would be a punishment seemed to get to him so much. Like, she really seemed to put her finger on the exact thing. And I don't really know. The thing is, like, you can't just take his power away and then have him go, like, into the world as a regular man to try and make it. Because he has the kind of devoted following that I feel even without power, he would still be able to manipulate and cajole people into doing what he wants. So you would have to take his power away and imprison him, like basically where he is at now, but with even less power. And I don't know, I just don't like the idea of keeping him alive. I feel like I get where she's coming from, but anything with this guy staying alive, he just always has the potential to work some damage in, you know? I don't like it. So eventually they get to the part where he is talking with her about the assassination attempt, and he asks, do you really think that you can even be killed? And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, you have accessed the kind of power that I and the other saints had access to. And that sort of like existence isn't easy to just wipe out. So I don't know. I'm just saying it might not be as possible as you seem to think it is. Grigori was eaten by a bear. Elizaveta was drawn and quartered. Still, they returned. And she says, there are stories whispered in the Elbjan mountains of the Dark Mother. She crowds in when the nights grow long. She steals the heat from kitchen fires. And I am assuming that she's talking about his mom? It's unclear. She doesn't like get real explicit about it, but that's what I thought she meant because of the mountains and that being where his mother was killed. So they eventually meet up with Alina. And I have to say, the Alina here just feels nothing at all like the Alina from the original trilogy. And I was sort of wondering how this was going to, play out, because there has been a long time between those books and these. And I can definitely put some of that down to the fact that, as Alina says to the Darkling, I am happy, and you never saw me that way. So perhaps that's most of it, is just the fact that she is happy, that she is at peace in a way that she hadn't been. Also, I'm not inside her head. So I think that also helps. But it just really felt for me like Alina was kind of a stranger. I didn't see her as having any of the same personality at all. And considering that I just didn't really like her, that's fine. I'm not really even saying I have a problem with it. But I had just been wondering what it would be like to see her again. And the answer is, it doesn't feel like I'm seeing her again. It just feels like I know her stats. But in terms of like who she is as a character, it's very, very different. So there's a really sweet moment too where she runs up to Zoya and like wraps her arms around her, and Zoya feels herself tearing up because she wasn't really sure how Alina would like react to seeing her. And then when they go inside, Ankat is there with the little kid. What is the name of this kid? I can't remember. Whose mother died. I had forgotten all about this kid. But he is one of the ones that just keeps trying to go after the Darkling, and a lot of both physically and verbally. He's just not interested in keeping himself under wraps. And why should he, honestly? So they sit around this, like they're in a abandoned sort of like summer home. and there's a bunch of like water damage, so their chairs have been set right in the front room. Zoya has given instructions for them to make tea and essentially like just be civilized about this meeting. And then we have a sort of back and forth of the Darkling needling all of them. And while it was somewhat interesting to read, it also felt a little bit tedious, to be honest, because it just does feel really like it's the same old games. It's the same scabs he's picking at, you know? And I don't know. It just didn't like, I didn't find it that compelling. I just kind of was like, let's just get to the point here. And he tries to like insist that Alina doesn't want to live like this, a nobody without power. And she's essentially like, you just don't know what it's like to want a simple life. Like I there's no way for me to make you believe that I am happy the way that I am, but I am. And I don't need to convince you of that. It's just the way it is. And he says, I want to make a safe place for the Grisha. And Alina says, it's not like you didn't get a fair try before. Hundreds of tries. If not me, then who? Nikolai? Zoya? I'm pretty sure I'm talking to a dead man, so maybe this isn't the time to throw stones. Right now, you're a man without a scrap of power, sitting in a house full of ghosts. Zoya has been fighting for years to keep the Grisha safe. She rebuilt the Second Army from the tatters you left behind. Nikolai has unified the First and Second Armies in a way never seen in Ravkan history. And what about the innovations of Genya and David? If Ravka is so strong, then why is Fjerda attacking? Do you really believe these cubs can lead a nation? Safety for the Grisha, a united Ravka. What if they are the ones to give this dream to us? Why does it have to be you? Why do you have to be the savior? I am the man best suited to the job. But there was something in the Darkling's voice that made Zoya wonder if he was quite as sure as he had been before he'd taken his seat. It has always been easier to see me as the villain, I know, but for a moment can you imagine I only ever tried to do what is best for my country and my people? I can, said Alina. Of course I can. Misha does not care for that. He starts yelling. And Alina tries to give the Darkling an opportunity to say that he regrets any of what he did. And he's just like, nah, I don't. So, all of a sudden, the Darkling sat forward, but suddenly Zoya wasn't looking at the Darkling at all. It was Yuri's bony, desperate face that stared out at her, Yuri's frightened voice that shouted, "He's going to..." The Darkling seemed to be falling forward onto his knees. He reached out and seized Alina's and Mal's clasped hands. The samovar clanged to the floor. Zoya stood, knocking her chair backward, but it was already too late. "No!" Alina shouted. Oncat hissed. Shadows flooded the room. Zoya couldn't see, couldn't fight. She was lost in the dark. And that's where I had to stop reading. So once again, not thrilled about that. And I'm trying to decide what it is about touching both of them at the same time that is like key here, because obviously the two of them were part of this like weird connection to Merzost, but I thought that was like over with. And he doesn't seem to think it is. And obviously he's making the place flood with shadows, so he seems to be right, at least somewhat. I don't care for this at all. At all. All right, I'm going to wrap up. But thank you very much again to Joanna for commissioning this episode. The next episode will be next Friday, so not too long. And I'm really glad because I just need to know. I need to know. So until then, thank you very much, Joanna, and thank you to Cheryl for coming and chatting with me. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
Unspoiled Network podcast.